Berlin, 1948. The once proud city lay in ruins, divided and isolated by Soviet forces. In the western sectors, children pressed against chain-link fences, watching massive Allied cargo planes roar overhead, bringing the food and supplies that kept them alive during the Soviet blockade. Can you imagine living in a city where even basic supplies could only arrive by air? What do you think life was like for these children? Share your thoughts below. Among the American pilots flying these vital missions was Lieutenant Gail Halvorsen, a farm boy from Utah who would soon become known by many names: the Candy Bomber, Uncle Wiggly Wings, and to the German children, Der Schokoladenflieger, the Chocolate Flyer. But on this particular day, while filming planes landing at Tempelhof Airport, Halvorsen noticed something extraordinary. Behind the airport fence, a group of children watched the planes with unwavering attention. Unlike children elsewhere, they didn't beg for candy or gum. Instead, they expressed profound gratitude for the flour and supplies that kept their families alive. The moment that changed everything. Something about these children's quiet dignity touched Lieutenant Halvorsen's heart. Reaching into his pocket, he found 2 sticks of gum. Breaking them carefully, he passed the pieces through the fence. Instead of fighting over the rare treat, the children broke the gum into even smaller pieces, sharing the paper wrapper for others to smell and touch. What would you have done in Lieutenant Halvorsen's position after witnessing such selfless sharing? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. That night, in his quarters at the air base, Halvorsen couldn't sleep. The faces of those children, the gratitude for even the smallest kindness, haunted him. Then, an idea began to form, as wild as it was simple. He would gather his candy rations, attach tiny parachutes, and drop them as he flew into Berlin. But first, he needed a signal. He promised the children that when they saw a plane wiggle its wings, that would be him, with a sweet surprise floating down from above. None of them could have known that this simple promise would evolve into something far greater than candy. It would become a symbol of hope in the darkest of times. Working late into the night, Lieutenant Halvorsen and his crewmates tied handkerchiefs to chocolate bars and gum, creating miniature parachutes. Each one represented not just candy, but a message to Soviet-surrounded Berlin: you are not forgotten. Even in war, kindness finds a way. The mission grows. Word of the candy drops spread through Berlin like wildfire. Children began gathering wherever they thought the candy bomber might appear, their eyes scanning the skies for wiggling wings. Letters addressed simply to Uncle Wiggly Wings started arriving at Tempelhof Air Base, some with crude maps marking where children waited, others with simple requests: please fly over my house. I have not caught a chocolate bar yet. If you could write a letter to the candy bomber back then, what would you say? Share your message in the comments. Soon, newspaper reporters discovered the story. When Halvorsen's commanding officer read about unauthorized candy drops in the press, he called the young pilot into his office. Lieutenant Halvorsen feared his mission was over. Instead, something remarkable happened. The commander smiled and said, "Lieutenant, keep dropping those bombs." What began as one pilot's simple act of kindness exploded into Operation Little Vittles. Other pilots joined in, candy companies donated tons of sweets, and American schoolchildren helped make tiny parachutes. Soon, the operation was dropping thousands of candy parachutes over Berlin. Even as Soviet forces maintained their blockade of Berlin, trying to starve the city into submission, small white parachutes drifted down from American planes. Each one carrying not just candy, but hope, friendship, and a message that someone cared. How do you think these candy drops affected the Soviet soldiers watching from below? What would they have thought? Share your perspective. By the end of the Berlin Airlift, Operation Little Vittles had dropped over 23 tons of candy, with more than 250,000 tiny parachutes floating down to waiting children. But the true impact wasn't measured in pounds of chocolate or pieces of gum, it was measured in changed hearts and minds. German children who had been taught to fear American soldiers, now ran toward the sound of approaching aircraft, waving and hoping for wiggling wings. How do you think these children explained the candy bomber to their own children years later? Share what you imagine they might have said. Decades later, those children, now grown, never forgot. When Colonel Halvorsen returned to Germany in later years, elderly men and women would approach him with tears in their eyes, still clutching aged handkerchief parachutes they'd caught as children. One woman told him, "It wasn't the candy, it was the hope. We learned that somebody in America cared about us." The impact rippled through generations. Former children of Berlin grew up to name schools after him, create memorial gardens, and tell the grandchildren about the American pilot who taught them that former enemies could become friends, one chocolate bar at a time. Today, Colonel Gail Halvorsen's story continues to inspire acts of kindness and reconciliation. Into his 90s, the candy bomber still visited schools, attended air shows, and even recreated his famous candy drops for new generations. At age 101, during Berlin's 2020 COVID lockdown, he sent a video message to the city's children, reminding them that hope appears in the darkest times, just like those candy parachutes so many years ago. What lessons from the candy bomber's story do you think are most important for today's world? Share your thoughts below. Across Germany, monuments and memorials honor the chocolate pilot. In Berlin, a school bears his name, and in the garden outside, children tend to rosebushes planted by those who caught his parachutes in 1948. Each rose, a symbol of how hatred can bloom into friendship. The U.S. Air Force continues his legacy, recreating candy drops at celebrations and air shows. Young pilots, learning about their predecessors' simple act of kindness, carry on the tradition of wiggling wings and dropping candy-laden parachutes to children below. Colonel Halvorsen passed away in 2022 at age 101, but his impact lives on. One small decision, to share 2 sticks of gum through a fence, grew into a symbol of how humanity can shine through even the darkest moments of history. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the candy bomber isn't found in monuments or medals, but in the simple truth he demonstrated: sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can drop seeds of hope that bloom for generations, and the sweetest victory in any conflict isn't won with weapons, but with chocolate bars on tiny parachutes, floating down from wiggling wings.